Okay, so I think if we want to talk about the role of L2s in the decentralized future, one of those places to start with is basically the L1 versus L2 division of labor, right? So if you think of Ethereum as this like big economy, right? So the purpose of the L1 is it's a security anchor. It's there to be secure. It's there to be decentralized. It's there to keep everything else secure. And it's there to keep everything else safely connected to each other, and it also supports some high-value economic activity, right? So, imagine you have this like big country, and then you have a fort, and the fort itself is safe, and the fort also helps keeps safe the entire economy around it, right? So, if the zombies attack, people can run into the fort for protection, and then we can call that a mass exit. Then, some high-value economic activity might make sense to just always happen inside of it, right? And so the point is not to like be hyperscalable. The point is to be secure. The point is to be robust and to be something that can be depended on in order to support everything else. The point of L2 is like to switch analogies a bit. It's the GPU of the world computer, right? This is where the really intensive stuff happens, right? And the L2 is the thing that really optimizes for speed, optimizes for scale, and it can do it better than things that are not connected to Ethereum can because it's able to rely on these extra properties of the L1 as a fallback. So L1, I think, has demonstrated success in decentralization, right? So 2 years ago, we switched from proof of work to proof of stake in the merge. And since then, the merge has been running for 2 years, extremely stably, and basically no serious issues. The worst that happened was that the network stopped finalizing for about an hour, but even during that time, blocks kept on coming. And if you look at decentralization, proof of stake has actually outperformed proof of work, right? So on the left, you have the Bitcoin hash power chart. And I put the Bitcoin one here because actually, like, you have to make a more fair comparison because the Ethereum pre-merge hash power chart is actually even worse, right? It's like proof of work contains it's based on economies of scale in the physical world, depends on hardware specialization, on top of all of the issues around burning huge amounts of electricity and all of that, right? And so if you look here, the top two pools have more than 50%, top four pools have more than 75%. And if you look on the right, that's the chart of staking decentralization. And like as a chart, it looks better already, but then if you start poking into the details of the chart, then you realize that like Lido, the blue thing at the top right, that is actually a DAO. And like, okay, fine, we have no way of like actually doing rigorously quantifying how decentralized the DAO is. That's a problem for all the sociology majors in the audience. Figure it out. There's actually even EF grant opportunities for this sort of thing. But you can think of Lido. The stake is split between like the majority of it, I think, is between about 37 different validators. And so I think it's reasonable to think of Lido as like somewhere in between 1 and 40 different actors. And then unidentified like is the second biggest slice. And unidentified certainly much more than one actor, right? Probably lots of solo stakers in there, probably various other different actors in there. Like that's not just like one guy, right? And then so proof of stake decentralization, I think, has actually been quite successful. And I think this is really important to talk about, right? Because if the job of an L1 is to be secure and is to be decentralized, then we want to see real life proof of that actually being true, right? And successful security decentralization requires both a strong technical layer and a strong social layer. And I think Ethereum has demonstrated a lot of success in both. So this is another one, right? This is the distribution of clients that are running the Ethereum staking. So these are approximate numbers, right? So according to the actual dashboard, like supermajority.info, if you click through, Geth could be anywhere from like 22% to about 62%, or I think 27 to 62. But what we have here is basically you have no single client that is above 2/3. And so what that means is that if any single client has a bug, then that bug is not going to cause the chain to finalize the wrong thing. Best case scenario, finality is going to stop for a while, and after some period of time, like basically in 12 hours, the client, like that client just publishes an update, and the chain returns to running, and everything is fine. Worst case scenario is if Geth has a bug and then it's like roughly 50-50, and you're basically going to have two different chains that all like both continue in parallel, but neither of them finalize, right? And so if you're actually doing like high value economic activity that depends on this chain, you're going to be waiting for finality, and you're going to notice that finality is not happening. And realistically, yeah, core devs are going to kick into gear. And last time something like this happened, the bug was fully fixed within 12 hours. The chain went back to normal again. Actually, even if a client has more than 51%, it actually doesn't matter too much, right? Because either way, as long as it's between 33 and 67, chain splits between two sides, and individual clients can just look at which side, and like heavy users can even switch clients if they need to, and eventually one of those chains gets picked. This is, I think, another one of those big things that's really worth talking about, because this is something that like very few ecosystems succeed at, right? Like forget even blockchains, right? Other blockchains, like nothing with this level of client decentralization, but even like internet browsers, right? With internet browsers, like basically 90% of them are like something like forks of WebKit, and then you have like Firefox kind of trying to stay afloat and doing an amazing and valiant job, and then that's basically it, right? So I think this is one of those things that are like very difficult to achieve, but when you have, it means that the network has both a high level of resistance against any kind of software bug that comes up, and at the same time also like greater political decentralization. You don't just have like one team that's pushing everything, and if you start disagreeing with them, then like you have to like somehow fire the core team, and then that process becomes very difficult. It's like here, no, like if the Geth team decides to just like completely go crazy, it's like a very quick switching process, and you just like switch over to using Nethermind and Besu. After stateless clients come in, the switching process will take like literally 5 minutes, and the network will be able to keep going. So the point of layer 1 is to be secure and decentralized, and so I think it's important to talk about just the successes there. Now let's talk about layer 2s. Layer 2s this year have demonstrated success in being cheap and in being increasingly secure. So on the left here, you have the L2Beat dashboard, and we're up to look, obviously, yeah, 2 stage 2 rollups. So D-Gate, it's a fork of Loopring, one of the early ZK rollups. That's great, and it's been around for a very long time. Fuel, the earliest optimistic rollup. So both of these are actually fully trustless and extremely cheap. So they've been doing amazing work for a very long time. And then Arbitrum, Optimism are full EVM rollups. They've hit stage 1. So they're really starting to hit these milestones in terms of turning the training wheels off. And I think it is now not true to say that L2s are just multisigs, and this will continue being less and less true in the future. Now, on the right, here you have fees. So basically, you have multiple rollups now where the fees are much less than 1 cent per transaction, right? And this is like a pretty big deal, right? Remember, like, who here remembers what transaction fees on Ethereum were like in 2021? Okay, who here has had the experience of paying for coffee and having the fee cost more than the coffee? Good. So that was 2021, right? 2023, you have L2s, they cost 50 cents each. The interop totally sucks. 2024, they cost 0.05 cents. The interop sucks less. And I'm hoping in 2025, the interop will suck not at all. So this is basically a huge amount of success on all of the across the layer 2 ecosystem here. So why be an L2? So I think there's a few different benefits of an L2 that are worth talking about, right? So one of them is that basically, we'll start with the core technical property. Anything that happens on one L2 can be trustlessly proven to any other L2. Also, anything that happens on one L2 can be trustlessly proven to L1. Anything that happens on L1 can be trustlessly proven to an L2. Right? So you have a fully trustless connection between L1 and L2s. Actually, even if L1 gets 51% attacked, the trustlessness of this connection still holds, right? So this is a very incredibly powerful, even close to absolute like a level of connection. like basically the only thing that it's vulnerable to are software bugs, and there's a lot of work happening on formal verification, and so I expect over the next couple of years, even the software bug issue is going to get resolved. So that's the benefit of being an L2. So now we can talk about what that means in practice for participants, right? The Ethereum L1 plus the L2s connected to it, they make up this connected Ethereum economy. Any asset that is issued on either L1 or any one of these L2s can be trustlessly held on either L1 or any of these L2s. If you issue a token on Ethereum L1, then you can see it, you can trustlessly hold it on any L2. If you issue a token on an L2, you can also trustlessly hold it on L1, and you can also trustlessly even hold it on any other L2, right? So that really deep level of interoperability is like where you're actually like arbitrarily able to be porting assets is something that like can only happen trustlessly within the Ethereum verse, right? If you move outside of the Ethereum verse, then you're basically trusting multisigs. So so that's the way that we think about the benefit from an economic perspective. Basically, just very high levels of asset interoperability, very high levels of all kinds of interoperability, even things like smart wallets, right? So there's this concept of a key store wallet where you basically have the keys and the verification logic of an account in one place, but then you're able to use that wallet, that accounts to verify things on any other of these L2s, and that's a really powerful construction. So a lot of different different things here, right? So in addition to being part of this big interconnected economy, as an L2, you also have less to worry about. If your L2 gets 51% attacked and it's an actual L2, users' funds are still safe. If your L2 gets 51% attacked and the attacker tries to censor transactions, users can still get transactions included through the L1 bypass channel. Even a fully centralized L2 gives users key security guarantees. It still gives users assurance that their funds will not be lost. It gives assurance that they have this bypass channel. It gives assurance that you will be able to withdraw. If you have a based rollup, then a based rollup has basically zero infrastructure dependency and very simple code, right? So as an L2, you can just do less and still benefit from the same level of security as the whole Ethereum ecosystem. One interesting trade-off that I think is going to come to the forefront more and more is this trade-off between based rollups and sequenced rollups. Right, and I think the way that this kind of progressed over the years is that at the beginning, when we thought about rollups, we basically assumed that all rollups would be based rollups, right? So a based rollup is a rollup where every block of the rollup is an Ethereum transaction. But then one of the challenges is like users often want low latency, right? Like high latency sucks, right? High latency can be tolerable, right? So like whenever I pay with a credit card, when I do the tap to pay thing, like often the interface does suck, and like the average waiting times are, I would say, roughly comparable to like Ethereum L1 waiting times, right? And like so far, credit cards like still kind of work, right? But there are definitely applications where you really want the speed, right? There's a lot of even like financial use cases. If you look at gaming use cases, right, it's like, okay, imagine, who here's played World of Warcraft, right? You remember where in World of Warcraft you have this like latency bar, right? And if the latency goes above 600 milliseconds, then like the latency bar is red, and red is bad, right? Yeah, you remember playing World of Warcraft when the latency is above 600 mils? It sucks, right? It's like, you're running around and then like suddenly this like big 50-foot golem is like suddenly behind you and it like hits you for 1,000 points and you're like, oh my God, and you're screwed, right? So basically, yeah, there are applications where like 600 mils of latency is like death, right? Virtual death, okay, fine. But then if you try to make a decentralized system have a latency of less than 600 mils, pretty soon it's not going to be decentralized, right? So even if you follow the laws of physics, one end of the world to the other end of the world, 20,000 kilometers, 133 or 67 mils by the speed of light. But then, you have overhead, you have wires, it's an imperfect connection. Easily you have hundreds of mils, and that's for one round of messaging. In order to have consensus, you multiply that by 3, and then you're at above 600 mils already, right? So you're basically, it's you can't be decentralized but have very low latency, or at least you need to do like a really heroic amount of work that probably most people don't want to do. And so what my current expectation actually is that I expect L1 to become more powerful over time and even have some version of shorter transaction confirmation times over time. There's two ways that this can happen. One way is natively shorter SWAT times, and the other way is some form of native pre-confirmations. And there is research happening in both of these directions. Justin is as excited about both of these roadmaps, and so work is continuing. And so L1 is going to get like slightly better, right? And so you might even imagine a world where like on L1, maybe 90% of the time you get a pre-confirmation in like 250 milliseconds or in like less than 2 seconds, and then 10% of the time like the proposer is not participating or they're gone or they're discriminating against you, and then you have to like wait for a full 8 seconds, right? And that's like already quite a bit better than the status quo, but that's still not perfect, right? And then at that point, my prediction is basically that like this weird middle category of rollups that try to be decentralized on their own is probably not going to be worth it. And so you basically have either based rollups that are decentralized by hooking into Ethereum, or potentially you have like basically like rollups that just have a centralized sequencer and they're okay with it, right? And like the centralized sequencer could easily rotate quickly, right? You could have a centralized sequencer that like changes every 30 seconds. You could have a centralized sequencer that has like some kind of governance for changing it, and the governance checks if it's doing any kind of like MEV exploitation. You could do a lot of different things, right? So like this is what like my current expectation for what the long term is likely to be. Short term, I think basically, I think what a lot of the time what actually makes sense is basically to just keep doing what you do already, right? So the trade-off today is basically that this is like short-term, assuming Ethereum does not do massive heroic work, right? I think either you have a single sequencer or you have a decentralized sequencer or you're based. And so I think short-term, the like decentralized sequencer path like really makes a lot of sense. And then also, if you are an L1, then chances are you are a decentralized sequencer already, and so it makes sense for, I think, L1s to just continue to be that, but then also add these extra pieces in order to have blocks be committed to L1, and then you get to be a rollup and you have like rollup level security guarantees. And then it also depends on like the application, right? And then longer term, basically, one approach is the based approach, and then the other approach is, well, you might imagine if you're a consensus protocol today, then like whenever you do leader election, instead of the leader just making one block, like the leader could just like publish, like do pre-confirmations and like publish, like a partial block like once every 200 mils or something like that, right? So there's like a lot of these different design options, but basically, if you fully take advantage of the L1, there's an opportunity to like considerably simplify, especially relative to the baseline of being an independent chain. But also like that's a transition process that can happen over time. And I think ultimately the correct transition process here also depends on the specific application. Some things need the crazy fast latency. Some things you just want to give users extremely good UX. For some things, like safety and decentralization are much more fundamental. Something censorship resistance is the most fundamental, and so depending on the use case, I think different categories of L2s are going to make sense, right? So that's how I see the landscape, right? I think the big conclusion of all this, right, is that, but being an L2, you get to be part of scaling Ethereum, and scaling is something that the Ethereum ecosystem really needs. And scaling is important, and speed is important, and bringing users extremely good user experience for all kinds of applications is important. And at the same time, there are all of these properties of the L1 that you're able to take advantage of in order to give extremely strong guarantees, both like as an L2 itself and also in terms of interoperability between things that are on your L2 and things that are on other L2s that are all enabled by L1 sitting in the middle as this like very secure and decentralized thing, right? And so basically, the goal, like being an L2 is like this very powerful position where you get the speed and scale and properties of either being like a very scalability favoring chain, or in some cases potentially even being a server, and at the same time getting a lot of these openness and security properties that we've all been here for the whole time. So thank you. The whole time.
Thank you so much, Vitalik, not just for your presentation, but for all the hard work you do for the Ethereum ecosystem. Another round of applause for Vitalik and everything he does. Are you eager to take a question? Or?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm seeing you're looking at. Let's take one or two questions. Who has something that they like, a hot pressing question? Can we get a mic
the flag hat guy. What was your name?
Flag hat guy.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brayton.
Okay.
So a few years ago, you mentioned the possibility of reducing ETH gas limit over time and things like that, and that's been a recurring topic.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned the idea that possibly it could be a pretty complex thing on like where the right points are, like market equilibria, et cetera, for really, really small gas limits. Do you think there's anything in that from either an L1 perspective or even like the future of extremely light L2s, or any crazy ideas there?
So again, I think my current view is that the L1 gas limit should increase, though it should increase cautiously. And I think the reason is that, one is that there are some types of activity that I expect will continue to just happen on L1, but also because ultimately, L1 needs to be like powerful enough to be able to like actually handle, like the people running into the fort if the zombie attack comes, right? So the analogy here is like, if an L2 breaks, right? So like, for example, a couple of days ago, I think it was like DYDX v3 like shut down, right? And as a result, the L2 beat people, hello, they had worked hard on implementing this alternative UI, and because it was an L2, users were actually able to withdraw, right? But then if anything happens to a rollout to an L2, you're going to see this like massive withdrawing process. You're going to see a lot of people exiting. You're going to see a lot of people re-entering. Like you're going to see some amount of like on-chain chaos, right? And if you have like a plasma type system, then the ability of it to, like even eigenDA as one example, like the amount of data that it can safely handle is actually proportional to the amount of data that the L1 can handle in the case where like something bad happens to like the off-chain data mechanism. And so because of that, like the L1 does need to be able to handle pretty significant amounts of activity in some exceptional situations. And so the theoretical max safe L2 capacity is actually proportional to the L1 capacity, right? And so for that reason, I think L1 definitely does, like it should not like go down to 1 million gas. Like I would say it should start increasing slowly, and like slow to medium increases are okay. But at the same time, we do need to keep prioritizing decentralization and verifiability, and I think those things can keep improving over time.
Do you think we'll ever see a fairly popular, extremely decentralized protocol with a gas limit of like 100,000 or even like a 1 or like a 0.1 TPS sort of situation within our lifetimes, or probably not?
So this would be like an L1 or?
Yeah, an L1, or even maybe not necessarily a blockchain, but some kooky sort of mechanism, but just extremely lightweight.
Right, like the thing that of that category that kind of makes sense, right, is like the timestamp hash like concept, right? Like the thing that comes to mind to me is like there was a centralized version of this that existed. It was the thing that Estonia called a blockchain back in the 2014 era, right? Basically, what they did is that every day in their newspaper, they published a hash, and then a whole bunch of government records were like Merkelized, and then you could have a proof that's a Merkle branch going into that hash, right? And like that basically is a 0.00001 TPS chain that ended up sort of like anchoring like a whole bunch of government data. I mean, there's a question of like how useful that actually is, right? Because I think often it's like easy to get excited about like anchoring as a meme without really thinking through like what are the actual practical benefits you're trying to get out of anchoring. But like sometimes those benefits do exist. So that's one example.
Beautiful, thank you.
Perfect. I think we need to move on to the next presentation from Merrick, and I think it's a great introduction. Thank you again, Vitalik.
Thank you.